So the MacBook Neo, not only is it the first new MacBook lineup in 11 years, it's probably Apple's most important product release in a long time, because at $600, it's the most affordable MacBook Apple has ever released, which raises the obvious question, what did Apple remove to make a MacBook this cheap? What's the catch here? After using the MacBook Neo though for a week, I realized Apple didn't actually compromise as much as you would think. This is a real MacBook experience for $600. Heck, $500 if you're eligible for Apple's education discount, which makes the MacBook Neo a stupidly competitive product, especially now that Apple has quietly increased the prices of all other MacBooks. So after a week of daily use, let's break down what Apple got right, compare it with a MacBook Air, what the compromises are, and how those trade-offs actually feel like in real-life use. Let's start with the elephant in the room, the chip. Apple is using a slightly cut down version of the A18 Pro, the same chip found in the iPhone 16 Pro. This version though in the Neo loses one GPU core, dropping from 6 cores down to 5. So the Neo is the first Mac that runs on a chip originally designed for a phone, which sounds a bit ridiculous for a laptop until you realize in single core performance, this chip actually edges out the M1 MacBook Air. For everyday tasks like browsing, messaging, writing documents, or streaming content, it feels very fast. You're not going to find better everyday performance like this at this price point. But it begins to struggle, unsurprisingly, when you do heavy multitasking or workflows that are reliant on multi-core performance. Think compiling code, video rendering, or even advanced Excel tasks. And this drains battery faster than I thought initially, which I'll talk about later in this video. But this is all consistent with benchmark tests. The Neo's performance just edges out the M1 chip in the MacBook Air and is over 30% faster in single-core performance. Also, ironically, the iPhone 17e is technically more powerful than the Neo. And although, yes, it does lag behind in multi-core tests, the impressive single-core speeds are better for activities like opening and switching between apps, web browsing, running Office apps, coding small projects, or just navigating Mac OS itself. In other words, the everyday tasks that, most people buying a $600 MacBook will actually be doing, the A18 Pro chip has your back. It's also kind of funny that the MacBook Neo is far cheaper and less powerful than an iPad Pro, yet it can do more pro tasks simply because the Neo runs on macOS and the iPad Pro doesn't. The Neo can run things like Terminal and even Xcode, meanwhile the far more expensive iPad Pro can't. So performance is surprisingly good, but here is where Apple had to cut corners and what it really means day to day. First is the non-upgradable 8GB of memory. In real life, this doesn't make the laptop suddenly feel slow, but you start noticing it in smaller moments. Apps take a bit longer to reload when switching between them, browser tabs refresh more often, and if you're doing heavier tasks like photo editing or even video work, things can obviously start to feel constrained. Another compromise is the display features. So the Neo doesn't include things like True Tone or wide P3 color support. So True Tone normally adjusts the screen's color temperature based on the lighting around you. So without it, the display can sometimes look slightly cooler. And since it can only support the standard sRGB color space, colors aren't quite as vibrant when viewing photos or videos. And plus the bezels are also significantly thicker than the MacBook Pro and Air. So although it's a 13-inch display, it does look visually smaller. That said, for everyday use like browsing the web, writing documents, or watching YouTube, the display still looks great. It's bright, sharp enough, and totally usable. But if you place it next to, let's say in a MacBook Air or Pro, that's when you'll start to notice the differences. Another compromise are the ports and connectivity here. So these are USB-C ports, not Thunderbolt ports, which means they're limited to slower speeds than the Air or Pro. So the left ports support USB-C speeds up to 10 gigabits, while the port on the right is limited to USB 2.0 speeds of just 480 80 megabits. This means external displays only work on the left port, which Apple doesn't actually label, and I think that would have been a nice touch as a design-friendly thing, but fortunately, Mac OS will warn you if you plug a monitor into the wrong port. But realistically, most people buying the Neo probably aren't plugging in a bunch of accessories anyway. For a lot of users, the only thing that will ever touch these ports is the charging cable. Also, the side-firing speakers are just okay, I find. The sound is kind of tinny and lacks any real depth or punch that the Air and the Pro have. You can watch content no problem, but you'll probably want to connect AirPods or headphones for any serious watching. Also, I have found that when you have the speakers on a higher volume, you can feel the reverberation when your palm rests are on this area or the trackpad. The speakers reverberate through that palm rest and trackpad so you can feel it, unlike the MacBook Air. But beyond that, the compromises are actually pretty small. The base model doesn't include Touch ID, you don't get a backlit keyboard. The trackpad isn't Apple's usual haptic one either, it's that traditional physical click trackpad. And call me crazy, I find it to be more tactile and a satisfying click, but because it's a physical trackpad, I am curious about how it's going to hold up long term when dust or lint potentially gets in there, but so far so good. So overall, I barely notice any of these compromises when using it. None of them actually affected how I use the laptop day to day. Which now brings me to what Apple actually got right with the MacBook Neo, and honestly, it is quite a lot. The design is ridiculously good. I am not exaggerating here. It really doesn't feel like a $599 budget MacBook. It feels like a proper MacBook. In this price range, you'd usually expect a plastic chassis, maybe with some aluminum parts here and there, but the MacBook Neo, it's actually made from recycled aluminum, and you can immediately feel it when you pick it up. And in this silver variant, I think it looks elevated and far more premium than its price tag would suggest. It would totally look the part sitting on a table at home, outside a cafe, school, or university. It's old school Apple aesthetic, and I am totally here for it. The keyboard has also been a highlight with my time with it so far. It's color matched to the chassis, unlike the all-black keyboards on the Air and Pro, and typing on it has been fantastic because it uses Apple's Magic Keyboard mechanism, so the keys feel really tactile and satisfying as you'd expect. Meanwhile, the 13-inch display, although lacking some features as I mentioned earlier, packs a punch and is surprisingly similar to MacBook Air's display. At a resolution of 2408 by 1506 and 500 nits peak brightness, it's much brighter and sharper than many laptops at the same price range, such as the Acer Aspire 5 or Lenovo IdeaPad, which, as you can see here, gets a 1080p display at half the brightness and with much lower pixel density per inch. There are two other surprising wins. I really thought the Neo would come with a 720p webcam, but actually we get a 1080p webcam. It's great, and for the few times I've used it for Zoom and Google Meetings, it is no different to my M3 MacBook Air. It's more than enough to show up well in meetings, calls, and even job interviews. Now, when it comes to battery life, it was nicely surprising because this thing runs the A18 Pro chip. I was really curious whether that efficiency would translate into a great battery life on this laptop. So on the first day, I charged it up to 100% and just used it normally, installing apps, answering emails, watching content. 5 to 6 hours later, I checked the battery and it was still sitting at 40%, which immediately told me, okay, I think this is going to get me through the whole workday. And over the next few days, I averaged about 7 to 9 hours of real usage. That included web browsing, messaging, media playback, some Figma work, and even opening and using a few Adobe Creative Cloud apps, all at around 70 to 80% display brightness. Now, that does fall a bit short of Apple's official battery claims, but in real life, for light productivity and everyday tasks, it comfortably lasts an entire workday. The catch is, though, when you start pushing it. Obviously, if you're editing, video editing, gaming, compiling code, or just have a ridiculous number of Chrome tabs open, the battery will drop much faster. Overall though, battery life is good for the price, but not quite the level of the MacBook Air. So the real question isn't, is the MacBook Neo worth it? At $600, it absolutely is, especially at a time when CPU and memory costs across the industry are continuing to rise. The real question is, who should actually buy this? And the obvious answer, I think, is price-conscious buyers, students, younger users, or even companies that just need to give their teams a reliable laptop. I'd also argue it's a total home run for people who might otherwise buy an iPad, but actually want to run a full desktop operating system. But after using it for a week, there's hardly any compromises at $600. The display, keyboard, webcam, performance, and battery life are all genuinely good. Good enough that this could easily be many people's everyday laptop, even if they weren't originally shopping for a budget machine. I think this is likely the kind of laptop many will buy, use for like 5 or 6 years without overthinking it, and then eventually trade in for something new. In fact, the appeal is so broad that it wouldn't surprise me at all if this ends up becoming one of the best-selling MacBooks Apple has ever made. It'll probably impact lower-end Windows, laptops, and Chromebooks, and probably pull a lot of students into Mac OS. So when you zoom out, this is actually a very smart move from Apple. The MacBook Neo is an entry point into the Apple ecosystem. This isn't something that you just buy once and then you're done with Apple. Because once you're using Mac OS, iCloud, AirDrop, Messages, and FaceTime, everything else Apple makes suddenly becomes a lot more sense. And once you're in, there's a very good chance you're staying in the Apple ecosystem. So I'm curious, would you buy a MacBook Neo? And if you already have one, how do you like it? If you enjoyed this review, drop a like and subscribe for more. And next week, I'm actually switching my entire workflow to the new M4 iPad Air to see if I can survive using only an iPad for a month. You can check out that video right here if you're watching from the future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.